Well, hello and welcome. I'm glad that you're with us as we continue our chronological read through of Scripture. It's now been, 3 months since the people left Egypt. God has led them about the wilderness, and now they're in the area of Mount Sinai. That's the area where God first called Moses and where he told Moses to bring the people to worship him after they left Egypt. Here, God will teach Israel what it means to be his people. They'll spend about a whole year there. 3 times the people will say that they will do all that God commands. And the first time we're going to hear today, they say that before they've even heard what he commands. God intends to talk directly to his people when he gives them the commands. So the people are told that they need to consecrate themselves and that they're not supposed to touch the mountain, actually on pain of death. You know, Moses' description of the mountain with God's presence and the smoke and the lightning and so on, it sounds like a volcano, but there are no volcanoes in the area or anywhere near. What this is the power of God. The people come out to hear God, but God calls Moses first to the top of the mountain and reiterates his warning that the people should not touch the mountain or they will die. And then he sends God back down the mountain to tell the people this instruction again. Finally, God begins to speak his commandments, really his instructions to the people. God gets only as far as what we call the Ten Commandments before the people are so afraid that they ask Moses to go and hear what God has to say and then to come back down and relay it to them because they're afraid that they're going to die in God's presence. Moses assures them that God is testing them, that they will not die if they obey his commands, but they insist. So Moses goes up and God speaks directly to Moses. The instructions that God gives to Moses become, quite lengthy and detailed. You'll read today about God's instructions for the altars that they make to offer sacrifices to him. And God reiterates again that they're not to make any idols out of gold or silver or anything else for that matter, because he has spoken to them directly from heaven. Those things there are the beginning of God's regulation on worship. There will be far more to come. You know, for centuries before and for centuries after the time of Moses, the economies of the world were based on slavery. God regulates slavery in these instructions that he gives to Moses. That doesn't mean that God endorses slavery, but since slavery is already there, God regulates it. He assures that the right of both slave and owner are understood and protected, especially the rights of the slave. It's helpful to understand that in the system that God lays out, a slave's work is owned by the master. Okay, the work of the slave is owned by the master, but the slave himself really is not. Even though they may be bought and sold and so on, the slave is really not owned. Verse 21 of chapter 21 equates the slave with money, something that it's hard for us to understand or to accept. But as I said, it's the slave's work that's owned by the master, not the slave himself. Well, for example, notice that there's a 6-year limit on the service of a slave. And then and it also talks about how the slave remains a part of the community. So all of these things interact in this rather difficult section here where there's quite a bit of discussion about slaves. God also provides a framework for the legal liability of a person for harm caused by that person's livestock or even work that that person is doing on his land that poses danger to another. I'm not going to go into those in detail. You're welcome to read about them. You're welcome to read them for yourself. Many of them will sound very, very familiar to you. As you read them, remember Jesus' own summary of the law, that we love our neighbor as ourselves. And notice how that principle underlies all of these commands. Our reading today ends midway through God's instruction on restitution for harm that one has caused to another, whether it's intentional or not. You might want to finish reading that section by reading through chapter 22, verse 15. Go ahead and read all the way that through, just to keep that train of thought going. Or when you pick it up tomorrow, you'll pick that back up again. Our next reading will continue on with more of God's instructions to his people. Also, I have an excursus chat that I'm going to do after this that does talk about the Ten Commandments a little bit more in detail. So you may want to listen to that as well. May God be with you and bless you. Again, I pray that your reading edifies you and that you grow in your faith through this. We will gather again